Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we saved among the best for last. To wrap up today's great event, we are honored to have the Director of National Intelligence to address us and share his thoughts on the role of intelligence in protecting our homeland. Jim Clapper is the epitome of a selfless public servant. 32 years in the Air Force, retiring as Lieutenant General, a Vietnam veteran, former Director of DIA. He was the first civilian director of NEMA, and under his initiative and vision, he got congressional authorization to rename it the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He is the former president of SASA, which, as most of you know, was the predecessor to INSA, the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. He was the second Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and he is now the fourth Director of National Intelligence. He is a former colleague, a dear friend, a mentor, and just an all-around great American patriot. Please join me in welcoming an inspiring intelligence professional, Jim Clapper.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be with you, and but I do realize that I'm standing between cocktails or whatever you're going to do after this, so I'll try not to take too long. But I do think it's a very important forum, and I did want to have the opportunity to engage with you a little bit. It's certainly a pleasure as well to engage with both INSA and CSIS. Both organizations have a great deal of respect for and have had a long association with each of them. Having served a long time ago, back in the 90s, as president of SASA, which was a predecessor to INSA. And I was a fellow or senior advisor or something for John Hamre at CSIS, so I do have a connection with both, and it's even better when doing something together. I did want to offer congratulations on the publication yesterday of the excellent INSA report, Intelligence to Protect the Homeland. Taking stock 10 years later and looking ahead. Dave Petraeus and I are going to have an opportunity to do that with a very rare joint hearing of the HIPSI and SISI, House Intelligence Committee and Senate Intelligence Committee next Tuesday, the 13th, which should be interesting, and that it's much the same subject. Where have we come, what have we done, and what do we need to do? So there is a lot of this going on about, considering the last 10 years. First, it's obvious to all of us that Al-Qaeda today certainly isn't the same as Al-Qaeda of 2001 was. I think, the pressure that, apart from, the dramatics of the raid in Abbottabad, but this consistent, steady, constant pressure on Al-Qaeda has really had an effect. They're not done. I would characterize them as WIA, wounded in action, but certainly not KIA yet. But we've vigorously attacked its leadership, kept them off balance. We've worked to deny its members and those who would direct its activities, a sense of security. And we certainly have disrupted their flow of resources, meaning money. We undermine their ability to plan and train under central direction. And of course, last but not least, we sent Osama bin Laden to the fate that he so richly deserved. And having played a small part in that, particularly those of you who saw the iconic picture in the style section of the Post, is one of the most intense, and also, for me, having spent about 48 years in intelligence, one of the most gratifying experiences of my professional career. All these accomplishments stand as testimony to the dedication and skill of many officers and intelligence officers in our military forces. Our citizens, I think, are safer because of this, and so while we have got great reason to take pride, we don't have a reason to gloat, to do high fives in the end zone, soften our focus, or relax our efforts. The terrorists are still out there, and we need to cope with them. They're smart. They go to school on us, and the nature of the threat they pose continues to evolve. So while core al-Qaeda is now weaker and is not as able to recruit, train, and deploy operatives because the attrition rate of late has been pretty high, it still, I think, represents the ideological touch point of the global extremist movement. It still continues to influence terrorists and would-be terrorists through public statements. That includes its affiliates and the homegrown violent extremists who are inspired by al-Qaeda's global agenda. I think there have been 3 critical IC-related factors to our success countering terrorists in the last 10 years. And I think the most important is the dedication, skill, and sharply focused attention of the IC workforce, something I intend to try to protect even as we downsize. By the way, I've been through one of these exercises before. I'm speaking since I think John Brennan earlier today made mention of something we're going to take on here, which I actually think is a real litmus test for the Office of D&I. Since in the last 10 years, we've been on a steady upward growth slope, both in money and people, which encompasses the entire 6-year existence of the Office of D&I, and now we're going to be in a different mode. And I hope to profit from my hard-won experience in the early 90s when I served as director of DIA, and we went through this before. Anyway, taking care of people. The second, which is something I'm pushing very hard in this capacity, is the integration of intelligence activities. And integration is, my thing, my spiel, my stick. It's what I'm pushing. Not only vertically across the so-called stovepipes, or horizontally rather, but also vertically, to the federal, to state, local, tribal, and private sector. And this is an area that I have learned, in this job particularly, is hugely important. It's not, that is an area, the domestic arena is not as mature as our classical foreign intelligence apparatus, and that stands to reason since we've only been doing this for 10 years. The third area is the expansion and maturation of responsible information sharing, which, of course, kind of relates to integration. So I'd like to focus a little bit on integration and the sharpening of our focus and tell you how that's improved our CT posture. So we've worked on the policy front, which is, kind of boring maybe, not very sexy, but it's important to work the policy and the mechanisms that permit broader responsible sharing across the IC with our partners and customers. CIA has, of course, the principal emphasis on the prevention of another attack on the homeland and importantly, the defeat of the terrorists abroad. And more than ever, it has a highly integrated partnership of analysts and operators who regularly team up with our military forces, the other intel agencies, for our foreign partners, and the private sector, organizations that many of you belong to. The FBI is, I think, under the leadership of Bob Mueller, and I think the nation is blessed to have him stay on for another 2 years. If you can imagine taking on kind of a high-stress job like that for 12 years, I salute him. And they've done, I think, a remarkable transformation in moving from almost exclusively a law enforcement organization to an intelligence-driven organization. I was down at Quantico recently to visit their training academy down there, and they're about to open up a magnificent new facility dedicated to just training intelligence analysts. And I think it's a very physical manifestation of the commitment that the FBI has to transformation. I had Bob over last week to speak to the workforce out at LX, Liberty Crossing. And he told our workforce that the FBI's transformation is a huge change in mindset, which, and I can relate to this, is something you don't get done by close of business next Friday. It takes time. And it took him a long time to wrap his head around what he was about and to infuse that in the larger FBI workforce. But the old way of doing business, prosecuting bad guys as a preventive deterrent, isn't enough when dealing with suicide bombers. As one example, the FBI's transformation has included the expansion of interagency joint terrorism task forces, led by the FBI in some 106 cities nationwide, and they carry out a critical function. There's been a remarkable transformation of going back over 10, 12 years at NSA. And they, too, are working to address the terrorists' increasing sophistication and use of technology, which is a challenge. DIA, my old agency, has established a Joint Intelligence Task Force for Counterterrorism, which provides tailored support for force protection purposes in DOD and the COCOMs. Provides all source national level terrorism intelligence analysis, warning, and enterprise integration. NGA, another, I also had the honor of serving as NGA's director for almost 5 years. And it too has done a great deal to embed and integrate GeoInt, geospatial intelligence, analysts and capabilities with its CT mission partners in the field and overseas. So every IC component, in one way or another, is contributing to what's become, I think, a truly comprehensive counterterrorism mission. Some other examples. The Treasury Department's intel professionals work closely with IC partners to identify terrorist financing sources. Even terrorists require resources. They require money. It's a common denominator from them. If we can get them in the pocketbook, that has huge impact. Occasioned by that is the designation of Leslie Ireland who's in the Treasury Department running their intelligence operation. She's dual-hatted for me as what we call a National Intelligence Manager for Threat Finance, which is an affirmation, a recognition of the importance of that as an intelligence endeavor. I think Matt Olson was here earlier today, and I do want to particularly commend the National Counterterrorism Center, which is the primary organization for cataloging and integrating all CT intel, except that which only pertains exclusively to domestic terrorists. And it serves as a basis for sharing information about known as suspected terrorists, screening of airline passengers, visa applicants, and immigrants. Very, very pleased to have Matt Olson succeed Mike Leiter as NCTC, and he too is also a National Intelligence Manager for Counterterrorism. And Matt is having a huge impact already and is doing great. Last but not least, and I'm saving this one for last intentionally, is the Department of Homeland Security. And it too has, of course, an intelligence component. And I think Karen Wagner, who's just here. And I view them as our principal interlocutors for strengthening ties to state, local, and tribal authorities, and working with Karen to try to enhance that. And they partner with both NCTC and FBI and lead an interagency threat assessment and coordination group. And to figure out what and how to best pass that to our state and local partners and private sector officials. I might mention something, just an example of, maybe a small one but an important one where we've come is after we established a community task force to exploit the treasure trove, as the media came to call it, of media that was picked up at Abbottabad. We set up a task force to exploit it and scarfed up just about every Arabic linguist we could put our hands on to start exploiting it. And the first day of reporting had included reporting that went to state and local entities. And I think that's, again, a small anecdote, but an important one. It's indicative of the changes we're making. And of course, I also want to mention, which I think are very important, are the fusion centers. 72 of them, which is the local nexus for imparting intelligence that we collect at the national level and also acting the other way as kind of conveying upwards, I'll call it street intelligence, which only state and local officials, I think, have good insight into. That too, though, is clearly a work in progress, and we're going to keep at it. Let me just dwell for a moment on the importance of Homeland Security and law enforcement, because that's actually where, for most Americans, the rubber really meets the road. When I first took this job, I was enjoined by many to look for efficiencies in the IC and further ways to sort of sharpen our focus. So one of my reviews, among others, was on the number, role, and results of all D&I advisory boards and panels. And we had a lot of advisors, I found, like 250 of them, and we had some 18 different panels and all this, or it was like kind of too much. There's just so much advice I can absorb. So based on that review, I pared them down from 18 to 4. One of these groups, of course, I have an overarching senior advisory group, and Fran Townsend is on that. And there may be some others out there I can't see. But the other 3 boards I kept were one on technology, one on diversity, and the Homeland Security and Law Enforcement Partners Board. So just to emphasize the importance I do and the place on that and the unique perspective that the people on that panel provide to me. In fact, coincidentally, I just met with them last week to receive their input on some key issues. And I have found this group to be a gold mine of wisdom and insight in an area I'm personally not as well grounded on. And so they made a very articulate, eloquent case for improving the intelligence enterprise domestically. And I think they are right on the money. And I intend to take that on. And by the way, they brought up training, particularly for analysis, advanced analysis, so we're going to work that. And then trying to police up Battlefield a little bit on reporting processes and vehicles. And I noticed that this kind of comports with the INSA report which has a number of recommendations for me, and so I certainly resonate with that. But I think particularly with this issue of how to describe that enterprise and who does what to whom in the domestic intelligence enterprise. Very important. The other thing that really struck me about this group was their great attention to and sensitivity about protection of civil liberties. And that's also something that we in the intelligence business have to be very sensitive about. One of the staff elements under my cognizance is the Civil Liberties and Privacy Officer, which is a very, very crucial position on my staff. I have a police, intelligence, law enforcement, and Homeland Security 32-year veteran on my senior staff, Russ Porter, who's fantastic. He is absolutely essential in directing our Homeland Security and law enforcement partnership efforts with federal, state, and local and tribal entities. About a year ago, I met with the Board of Governors for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, another very valued group. And that encounter, which was I actually was down in Orlando, I guess. I was meeting with originally just to meet with the convention or conference of all the FBI special agents in charge, and learned that the board of directors was meeting at another hotel, so I went over there, and it turned into a fantastic session. And so I am engaging with them as well. I have visited state and major urban area fusion centers. I'm going to do some more of that in October. 3 more fusion centers I want to hit. And that just get me more sensitized to the perspective that the people operating these things have. Last spring, I visited sites along the southwest border to better understand our capabilities there, and was tremendously impressed with what I saw. So, this business of intelligence integration is that's a big order, but it's something I'm very committed to improving. And of course, I alluded earlier to the raid and the takedown of UBL, and I would submit to you that that's a classic example of intelligence integration. CIA kind of got a lot of credit, and deservedly so, lots of publicity, but I would also tell you that were it not for NSA and NGA, that would not have happened. So it's a great example of integration, and where the sum is greater than the parts. I'm happy to tell you that this sort of integration is becoming more and more routine. We kind of dwell on things here in the Beltway, but let me tell you, if you go out to the pointy end of the stick, intelligence integration has become kind of the standard. I've, in the last month and a half, visited 5 embassies in Delhi, Islamabad, Kabul, Phnom Penh, and Bangkok. And I've really been impressed with the role that, the second role that chiefs of station play as D&I representatives, in which they are the leader of the IC contingents in these embassies. And increasingly, you'll find several of the IC organizations represented at these embassies. And 2 ambassadors of the 5, just without any prompting or solicitation on my part, mentioned what impact that has of having a designated leader for intelligence matters in each embassy. The UBL takedown is a very visible, dramatic example of this, but I think this is, kind of goes on a lot. So let me close on perhaps a sobering, but what I think is a realistic note. And that is that despite all we've done over the last 10 years, we can't guarantee we're going to bat 1,000 every day. Certainly we're not in intelligence. And we just have to recognize that truth, I think, both within the intelligence community and as a people. When we're inevitably attacked again someday, we will continue, I believe, to be relentless in going after those who planned, coordinated, executed such an attack. And we must absolutely be resilient. We must not allow anyone to, or anything to distract us from our mission and our principles and our values as a country. 135 years ago today marked the end of the infamous James Younger gang in what was called the Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid, their final bank robbery and murder spree, and law enforcement officials were ready for them and gunned them down, and some were killed. Cole Younger and his brothers were captured, and Frank and Jesse James were wounded but got away. 5 agonizing years later, Jesse was killed for the $5,000 bounty on his head. A few months after that, his brother Frank walked into the state capitol building in Missouri and turned himself in to the governor. And he said, and I quote, "I was tired of an outlaw's life. I've been hunted for 21 years. I have literally lived in the saddle. I've never known a day of perfect peace. It was one long, anxious, inexorable, eternal vigil. When I slept, it was literally in the midst of an arsenal. If I heard dogs bark more fiercely than usual or the feet of horses in a greater volume of sound than usual, I stood to arms. Have you any idea of what a man must endure who leads such a life?" And I think it's the job of those of us in the intelligence community to make every terrorist out there even more miserable than Frank and Jesse James were. And I have to say, in this regard, I think something we've underestimated is the effects of 6 years of isolation on UBL and the effect that had on his leadership of al-Qaeda. We put in place some remarkable capabilities that the nation's invested in and achieved significant successes. And so it's clearly something we recognize. It's our obligation to do all we can to prevent another attack. And so we will prevail, and we will not relent in that effort. So that concludes my remarks. It's great to see you, and my thanks again to INSA and CIS for sponsoring this. From what I've heard, there have been some great panel presentations and some great speakers. So thanks very much. Enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the conference. Thanks for participating with us.